Hello. Today we're going to get cracking with bill production and the measurement of quantities for your bills of quantities. You'll see the familiar welcome window open. All I have to do now, because this is the correct job that I want to work on and this is my correct library, all I have to do is enter my user code and click log on. Remember, if you don't have a user code yet, you can type in the user code demo and click log on. Right, now we click Bill Production, the tab on the ribbon, and we'll see all the functions that allow us to create bills of quantities. I'm going to go directly to the Bill Datasheet, and what I'd like you to remember, because I think I've mentioned it before, is that when you start a new job, you start off with no data, i.e. you start off with a blank slate, and it remains now to select the library items that you want to measure. And then continue to measure them. So the way that we do that is to click this button, which is captioned library items, where we'll go and select the library items that we want to measure. Let's just say that I'm going to measure some foundations, a bit of side clearance. You'll notice that I can expand the plus signs to show the detail of the items that I'm going to measure. So let us select that one. I'm going to say save and leave this window open so that I can select more items. I'm going to go to excavation and I'm going to say excavation in earth not exceeding 2 meters deep for trenches. Save. And you'll notice as you look through the library that there are many other permutations of your excavations. So just bear it in mind. If you don't see what you want under one heading, you can have a look at the next item. These are generally the subheadings are generally to do with the depths of the excavations. If I say risk of collapse, I'm going to say sides of bulk excavations not exceeding 1.5 meters deep. And then and let us say that I'm going to do some carting away to a dumping site to be located by the contractor. Please note that what I have done is I first selected the risk of collapse and afterwards I decided to cart away the excavations. You will notice when we come back to the bill data sheet, you'll notice that the items are ordered in the correct bill order. So it doesn't matter in which order I select the items, they are automatically saved to your job in the correct order. Now let us say that we're going to put some concrete in the bottom of our trenches. Please note I can close the trade above by using the backward arrow, as well as using the minus signs. It's quite an interesting thing that you might like to know. Okay, so let us go to unreinforced concrete cast against excavated surfaces. Now you'll notice that this is a generic subheading and we need to put in some details about it. Let's say that is the spec for my concrete, and we're going to say it's in strip footings, and I'm going to say save. And let's assume that we'll now build a wall on top of that footing. So we'll open masonry, and we're going to go to brickwork in foundations and we'll say that one, and we're going to say this is for external walls, so I'm going to choose something reasonably strong. Okay. I'm going to give it some details in its description. You'll notice that I can simply edit it in this block at the top. And then I'm going to say save and hide. There is no difference to using the save button except that save and hide will return me to my Bill Datasheet. Now what you should notice is that it has shown me the details of the trade that I most recently saved. If you want to see them all, select all at the top in the trades column. I'd like to draw your attention to the items which are highlighted on the screen. I saved first the risk of collapse item, and afterwards I saved the carting away items, and I told you at the time that it didn't matter in which order the items were saved. They would in fact come out in correct bill order once you had a look at them in your bill datasheet, and I'm just showing you and illustrating that this has in fact been the case. When you look at the bill datasheet, you'll notice the item type listed here in the left-hand column. These are fairly self-explanatory. A heading generally is listed in capitals, a subheading, and the item, which is the item that carries a unit of measure and therefore must be measured. So if I want to measure the site clearance item, there are a few ways that I can do it. I can start by double-clicking to the left of the item's description, and I can say I've got a square plot, and this is the area of my site to clear. Now, what I'd like you to note is that the system knows, by virtue of the fact that we have a square unit of measure, it knows that I need a length and a breadth dimension, and it automatically skipped over the third, or the height/volume dimension, so that we have in fact only two inputs. Okay, now there are various times factors that you can apply. You could multiply this result by anything you liked and it would be represented in the total column. The formula that is used across these 6 columns is each is multiplied. Okay, so I'm just going to put a note in here to myself that this is the site area. Please note the references are free format. You can put in anything you like, but it seems to work best for most users when they reference it back to the drawing with something that is easily identifiable on the drawing. Please also note that there is the requirement to put in a location because the section is locational, and I'm going to use item location because this clearance of site applies to all the other buildings on the site. When I click OK, my dim sheet is closed, my quantity is updated here on the bill data sheet, and we can continue. Please note that this bill so far carries no rates. Your contract rate will only appear later once a complete bills of quantities has been sent out to tender and has been priced by tendering contractors. But in the meantime, if you would like to have the build-up of amounts for the measured quantities, you can use the QS rate, and I'll just, for the purposes of illustration, enter a QS rate of 150 Rand per square meter. You'll notice immediately that at the bottom of the screen, where it says total, you will see the net effect of having entered 150 Rand a square meter against 1,600 square meters of site clearance, and it comes to almost 250,000 Rand. You'll notice also in the column on the right, which is the amount column, that the 240,000 Rand appears listed as the amount for this item, my site clearance item. Please notice also that when I returned to this screen, the bill data sheet, from the dimension entry window, I was returned to the earthworks trade. That is because I was measuring for the earthworks trade, and QSPlus is assuming that I'm going to continue in earthworks. So all that means for the moment is that I can't see the concrete items and I can't see the masonry items that I have already selected, but they are present, as I show you here, by selecting the trade which applies to them. So I'm going to start by measuring the trenches item. That is my excavation for trenches, and as we see, it is a cubic measure, and I will do that by clicking the DIMS button at the top of the window, which will open a new dim sheet for me with nothing in it. So what must happen now is I must put in the measurements. So I have a length of this building of 12 meters, and the width of my footings is 0.3, and the depth of my excavation is 1 meter, and there are 2 such walls. Okay, so that is the volume that I'm going to excavate for the length, and now I've got the width. Please note how the figures that I entered in the upper line are defaulted into the second line, and this is the total volume of my excavation for the main building. I select the location at the top. I click OK to return to the Bill Datasheet where my quantities will have been updated. I return to the Bill Datasheet where the bill quantity will have been updated. And now, if you look at the next item, it contains the same unit of measure as the previous item, and in fact, the carting away will be identical to the volume of the excavation. So it's a perfect opportunity to use the AND-ON function, which I'll show you when you click this button, AND-ON. You come to a place where you can actually select the items which have been measured. There is my trenches item, and it's a simple question of selecting it and then selecting, of course, my main building as the location. And there you will see the same quantity. The interesting part about this is that if I change the 22 cubic meters of excavation to, let's just say 23, it will automatically change the carting away item to a quantity of 23. You will find this very useful. Now we come to the risk of collapse item, and this is for the sides of the excavations, 2 sides to the trench for the length of the walls. So I'm going to measure it. By clicking DIMS, and I'm taking the length of the wall, the depth of the excavation, 2 sides, and there are 2 such walls, and I'm repeating the same qualifying DIMS in the line below. And when I click OK, we'll update this quantity and return to the Bill Datasheet. You'll notice that I've entered a more realistic site clearance rate, and I've entered some rates for the other items that I've measured, so that this amount, this total at the bottom of the window, is the sum of the amounts listed in the amount column. I'd like to point out at this point that we have no contract rates, but if you have a contract rate, it will be used in preference over the QS rate. So for example, if I simply enter 95 Rand as the contract rate for the item, you'll notice that it's been used, and this total at the bottom of the trade has in fact been updated to reflect the 95 Rand unit rate on the site clearance. If I remove the 95 Rand, you'll notice that the total at the bottom will return to what it was before. I'd also like to touch on the rate spec. The rate spec in all cases for most items is normal. That means that on the bills of quantities it will print a unit of measure, a quantity, a rate, and an amount. Rate and amount obviously only on a contract priced document. But there are other rate spec descriptions which you can have a look at by using the drop down arrow, and they will treat the printing of the rate on the bills of quantities in a slightly different way. For example, provisional sum will print the unit of measure item, no quantity because it's always a unit, no rate because 1 times rate will equal the amount. So it will print an amount and not a rate. And it will print that amount, if it were a provisional sum, on the tender bill and the contract price bill. On the tender bill because that amount cannot change. It's been specified in the provisional sum. And next, I'd just like to discuss this column, the decimals column. You'll see that the number of decimals to print on the bills defaults to 0 in most cases, except for tons, where it is reflected as 2 decimal places for more accuracy in calculating the amount for the item. You have the option here for any requirement that you have for any unit of measure to list the number of decimals as 1 or 2, in which case they will print like that on the bill. Changing the number of decimals on any of these items that I've measured will have no real visible effect because in fact I just used integers in my dim entry, but later on there will be an opportunity for me to show you what that's about. We need to measure some backfilling, and we haven't selected that from the library yet. So I'm going to go to the library, and we're going to go to Earthworks and to Filling, and we're going to go and have a look for a backfilling item. Here I have one, and I'm going to say Save and Hide, and you'll see that it's put my filling item in the correct order for my bills of quantities. To measure the backfilling, we have to do a couple of calculations, and so I'm going to use this opportunity to show you the side costs feature. First of all, we'll go to a new dim sheet, and what we want is the length of the walls, and then we need to calculate the thickness of the backfill. So let's start with a 12 meter wall, and we know there'll be 2 in the end. So in my second dimension, I'm going to double click, and that will give me a new side cast. I'm going to go with the simpler way of entering the side cast, which is to give it a reference. This will be depth of excavation minus thickness of footing minus blinding. And the formula for this is going to be the depth of the excavation is 1 meter, and my thickness, the thickness of my footing is 3, and my blinding layer is 0.05. I'll just make it look neat. So what we have is the result, which is 0.65, and that's going to be the depth of my backfilling. I may as well put it into this reference if I can. What you'll notice is when I clicked Insert to Dim, it inserted that 0.65 into Dim 2. Now what I need to do is to find the width of the excavation minus the width of the wall. So I double click in dim 3, and this is width of backfill, width of excavation minus thickness of wall. And that is going to be, I beg your pardon, 0.6, which is the width of my trench, minus my wall thickness, which is 0.28. And you'll see here it's given me 0.32, which is the width of my backfill. Okay, and now we know that we have two walls that are 12 meters long. And we have two more, which are 25 meters long. And you'll see that it's defaulted this number in dim 2 and dim 3. And all I have to do is enter 2 times, and it gives me 10.4 cubic meters added to 4.99 cubic meters, and of course my location, which is main building, and that is okay. And now it remains to give the item a rate. I'll just give it an ARB 70 Rand and allow it to update by moving the cursor off the row, and you'll see that it has increased the total at the bottom of the Bill Datasheet. And I think that wraps up the earthworks for now. So I'm going to move on to the concrete, where I selected only the footings. So to start now on the concrete, I'm going to need to select some more items from the library. We'll start with the blinding. I'll go to the library and I will find unreinforced concrete cast against excavated surfaces, class, let us just say class A concrete, and I'll change the description at the top of the window, and I'm going to say surface blinding under footings and bases, and I will save that. And while I'm there, I'll go and select some test cubes, and I'll save that too. While I was there, I also selected a reinforcement item, just some reinforcing steel bars for my footings. So if we start with the surface blinding, we need the length of the wall. And to measure the blinding, we need to calculate the length of the wall times the width of the trench, which is 0.6, times the thickness of the blinding. The blinding layer is 0.5, and there are two such walls. And then, of course, the longer wall, and it defaults those two dims to the ones above, and there are two of those walls, and so my total volume of blinding is going to be 2.22. Now, what I did earlier was I set the number of decimals to 2. It's not normal for this item, but I just wanted to show you this is the actual total for this bill item. And if I set it to correct it to an integer, which is standard for the item in the bill, you'll see that it reduces it to 2. That is correct, but I was merely seeking to illustrate for you the use of that number of decimals column and how you can adjust what actually prints in the bill. To measure the footings themselves, we have our 12 meter length wall, and we must multiply it by the width of the footing multiplied by its thickness. And of course, again, there are two walls, and again we have the 25 meter long wall, two of those, and there is our total 13.32 in the main building, and that is the volume of concrete in the footings. And we'll give it a rate, let's say 1,500 Rand. And once again, I'll just show you what will happen if we change the number of decimals to 2 for that item. You'll see it will show me the exact figure, which is 13.32, whereas if we set it to an integer, which is standard, we'll get 13. And now we're going to measure the test cube. We'll go to DIMS and we'll enter a side cast, because in fact it's a number of test cubes. And I will type the formula here, which is the width of the footing times the thickness of the footing divided by 17. And that gives me 0.001, which quite clearly is going to give us a quantity of 0. So in fact, what we need to do is just measure one test cube. To measure the reinforcement item, and this is tons, that's interesting because you'll notice here that the default number of decimals is 2, to give us greater accuracy in arriving at an amount to print on the bill. I'm going to double click it, and I'm going to measure it as the length of the wall. The width of the footing is 0.6, the thickness of the footing is 0.3, and there are two walls, and the amount of steel is 0.06 factor, and then I have the other wall, which is also 2 times 0.06, and all of this is in the main building. Okay, and there is my 0.8. I'm going to find a couple of rates. I think this is about 65 Rand. Remembering it can be changed later. And the steel reinforcement at 12, I beg your pardon, I'm in the wrong field, so it wouldn't let me enter it there, around 12,000 Rand a ton, which is why it's important that it should be corrected to 2 decimal places. And you'll notice that it's displaying 0.8 of a ton instead of 1. If we had it as 1 ton, it would be quite seriously overvalued. So now we're going to measure the foundation walls. I will give it a rate of 340 Rand. We can double click to measure. It's going to be the length of the wall, and it's going to be a foundation wall, so it's 0.5 meter high. There are 2 of these walls, and the other wall, and there are 2 of those, and that is the foundation brickwork.